It all started on a quiet, sunny morning in the valley, the kind of morning where the air smells like fresh grapes and the hills seem to glow. I was walking along the edge of my vineyard, checking the vines, when a convoy of SUVs rolled up to the gated entrance. Out stepped a woman I'd never seen before, sharp sunglasses, clipboard in hand, the kind of stride that screamed authority she hadn't actually earned. Behind her were two local police officers, looking like they weren't quite sure why. They were there. She didn't bother with introductions. Instead, she turned to one of the officers and pointed at my property. "Drag the vineyard owner here now," she barked, as if we were all living in some 1950s movie where she was the queen and everyone else was a servant. I could hear her voice echoing across the open rows of vines. The officers exchanged a glance, clearly uncomfortable, but she was relentless. She started rattling off something about HOA violations, talking about fences, landscaping, and community rules that apparently didn't exist here. I stayed still for a moment, curious to see how far she'd go before realizing she was out of her depth. 5 minutes passed, and the scene only grew more ridiculous. She paced by the gate, arms crossed, talking loudly into her phone about getting the board involved and teaching the vineyard guy a lesson. The officers stood nearby, awkwardly shifting their weight. Then, the moment came. I finally walked toward the gate, hands in my pockets, calm as the morning breeze. She spun around, ready to unload her next demand, but stopped mid-sentence when I smiled and said, "I'm the vineyard owner." For a heartbeat, she froze. And then I added, "Oh, and by the way, I own the entire valley." The look on her face was priceless. The officers glanced at each other again, this time with a different kind of understanding. But before anything else could happen, well, that's where things got even more interesting. Her jaw tightened. But she quickly tried to recover, putting on a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Well, I wasn't aware of that," she said, her voice suddenly softer. The officers still didn't move, as if they were waiting to see how this strange dance would play out. I could tell they hadn't been given the full story before she dragged them out here. I leaned on the gatepost, still calm. "Interesting," I said. "Since you're talking about HOA violations, maybe you can explain which HOA you think owns this valley." She glanced down at her clipboard, flipping through pages filled with maps, property lines, and printed rules. But I knew those maps didn't include my land, because this vineyard and everything you could see in every direction was private property. My private property. She cleared her throat and started talking about community standards and shared interests, but her voice wavered. I noticed the officers now looked more curious than cooperative. One of them even asked her, "Ma'am, are you sure this is in your jurisdiction?" She ignored the question, pressing forward like a chess player bluffing her way through a bad move. I decided to let her speak because every word she said only made her case weaker. But inside, I was starting to wonder, why was she so determined to get me to comply with rules that had nothing to do with me? Was it personal? Was there someone behind her pushing this? Or was she just the type who couldn't stand not being in control? From where we stood, the view stretched for miles, rows of vines, a few old barns, the winding dirt road that led down to the valley floor. My family had been here for generations, long before any HOA developments popped up in the nearby hills. And yet, here she was, trying to claim some imaginary authority over land she had no stake in. The air was still warm, but there was a shift in the mood, like a storm building far off. She straightened her sunglasses, looked me in the eye, and said, "Well, owner or not, you're going to have to answer to us." That was when I knew. This wasn't just about grapes or fences anymore. The officers shifted again, and I could see in their faces that they weren't exactly thrilled about being caught in the middle of this. One of them subtly stepped back, scanning the vineyard as if trying to figure out how this patch of land could possibly fall under some suburban HOA's reach. The others stayed closer to her, arms folded, but his expression had turned cautious. She didn't seem to notice their doubt. Instead, she launched into a list of supposed violations. Something about the height of my fencing, unapproved structures, and even the visual impact of my barn from the road. It was laughable, considering the road she meant was a private dirt track that hadn't seen more than a few visitors a month. But the way she spoke, it was as if she believed saying it with enough confidence would make it true. As she talked, my mind wandered to the developments up in the hills. Over the past year, new luxury homes had started popping up where there used to be nothing but wild grass and oak trees. With those homes came people like her, people who didn't understand the valley's history but wanted to shape it into their version of a perfect community. It made me wonder if this was part of a bigger push to pressure older landowners into selling. The officers asked for paperwork, and she hesitated. That hesitation told me more than her words ever could. She was here on assumption, not authority. But the fact she'd brought back up meant she thought intimidation might do the job. Meanwhile, in the distance, I noticed my foreman driving the tractor along the edge of the property. He slowed down, watching the scene unfold, and I could tell he was ready to step in if needed. The workers had heard rumors about this HOA Karen trying to meddle in other parts of the valley, but I'd brushed it off until now. She took a step closer, lowering her voice like she was delivering some final warning. "You can make this easy, or you can make it hard," she said. The thing was, she had no idea just how hard this valley could push back. The silence after her words felt heavy, like the air just before a summer thunderstorm. Even the officers seemed to sense it. One of them adjusted his belt, the other glanced toward the hills, as if wishing he were anywhere else. I didn't move. I just stood there, letting the weight of her own threat hang between us, from behind me. The faint hum of the tractor faded as my foreman cut the engine. He hopped down and started walking our way, his boots crunching over the gravel. He wasn't a man of many words, but his presence alone always had a way of changing the temperature in the room more in this case. At the gate, she noticed him approaching and straightened her back, gripping her clipboard tighter. "Is this another one of your employees?" she asked, her tone dripping with condescension. I didn't answer. My foreman stopped a few feet behind me, arms crossed. Watching her like a hawk dot, I could see her confidence start to waver again. But she tried to mask it with speed, flipping through her papers and shoving a document toward the nearest officer. "This is all the evidence we need," she said. The officer didn't take it right away. He read it where it was, eyebrows lifting slightly before he handed it back without a word. That told me everything I needed to know. Somewhere in the distance, a wind picked up, rattling the leaves on the vines. The air had shifted, cooler, sharper. The valley had a way of amplifying moments like this, where small things suddenly felt big. And you could sense that something was about to tip. She stepped closer, invading my space now. "If you don't agree to the compliance terms," she said, "we can escalate this to the highest level. Trust me, you don't want that kind of trouble." For a moment, the only sound was the breeze pushing through the vineyard rows. My foreman took a slow step forward. The officers leaned in just slightly, and I finally looked her straight in the eye. We were seconds away from something breaking. And once it did, there would be no turning back. Just as the tension reached its peak, the sound of tires crunching over gravel broke the silence. All eyes turned toward the bend in the dirt road. A black SUV rolled up, sleek and spotless, the kind you only see when someone wants to make an entrance. The vehicle stopped just short of the gate, and out stepped a man in a tailored suit, clearly out of place in the dusty valley. He looked around slowly, his gaze sharp. like he was measuring every inch of land and every person standing there. The woman's face lit up, almost with relief. Finally, she said under her breath, "This is who I was telling you about?" The man didn't approach her right away. Instead, he walked to the officers, exchanged a few quiet words, and handed one of them a folded letter. Then, without so much as glancing at me, he addressed the group in a calm but firm tone. "As of this morning," he said, "certain sections of the valley are under review for annexation into the HOA district." It was like someone had just dropped a stone into still water. Ripples of confusion and disbelief spread instantly. My foreman muttered something under his breath. The officers exchanged another one of those uneasy glances, and I felt a slow burn rise in my chest. Annexation. That wasn't just meddling. That was a move to take control. The woman smirked, clearly enjoying the sudden shift. "So you see," she said, "you may think you own the valley, but things are changing." But something about the man's delivery didn't add up. His eyes avoided mine, his voice carefully measured, like someone reading from a script. They didn't fully believe. An annexation didn't happen overnight, not without hearings, notices, and months of legal work, which meant one of two things. Either they were bluffing to scare me into compliance, or something much bigger was hop.